Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Elise Herzig, and I have the honor and privilege of being the Executive Director of JIAS Toronto, a settlement agency that has been helping newcomers coming to Canada for the last 98 years. Today, we have a special program that we've designed for you, looking at crisis and creativity, how artists are coping with the pandemic, and we're focused today on immigrant artists. This program would not be possible without the support of the Koffler Gallery, who's been our partner in this project. And really, we can't thank them enough. And a special shout out to Jessica I just want to make sure I get your name right. Sorry about that. To Jessica Dargo Kaplan, who behind the scenes and in front of the scenes did a lot of work to make sure that we had the right complement of people here today. So a big shout out to her, and really a thank you to the Koffler for their work. So for the last 2 months since COVID started, JIAS started a new program where we're offering webinars trying to bring the immigrant lens to the conversation of the pandemic. This is a third of a series, and I'm very excited about today's panel. I've had really the pleasure of speaking to them individually, so you're all in for a very big treat. They're fascinating people and their stories are wonderful. We end the program at 1 o'clock, and I will, around 10 to 1, start to give time for the panelists to answer any questions that have been sent to us. So if you want to send on the chat line any questions you have, we will try to make sure that we have time to address all of them. I'm going to do a very brief introduction on our wonderful panelists because they're so interesting, and you don't want to waste, I don't want to waste your time listening to their bios. You want to hear them live. You can look them up afterwards. So our three panelists are, one is Tufik. Tufik came to Canada in 2003. I'm going to pull up my script over here. He was born in Paris to a Berber Muslim family. He grew up in Morocco and then France, and he feels a deep kinship with both cultures. In 2003, he had not a great day of work, and that really changed his life around, and he's going to share more about that with you. And through his immigration experience, he was forced to confront his relationship to gender, religion, politics, and society, an experience from which he derives much of his inspiration. I'm not going to go into the details of his artistic work. He's going to share that with you. I'd like to next introduce Igor Portnoi. Igor also came to Canada in an interesting way. Very few people make their immigration journey the way he did, and that took place in 1992. He also got helped by JIAS, so it's very special to us to have somebody with a JIAS connection on today's panel. His work is more in the theatrical arts in terms of productions of plays and being on television. And if for those of you who feel like you're missing out on entertainment during the COVID crisis, go check out his Facebook page. I enjoyed a lot of his singing, and he will share his stories with us shortly. And the third panelist is Ximena, and I can't pronounce your last name, I think is Huizi. She was born in Caracas, Venezuela. She's a non-binary theater artist whose multidisciplinary work explores the complex issues of displacement, dualities, and translations. In 2017, they directed a production of Nuestra Señora de las Nubes, written by Aristes Vargas, and approached the work as a way of investigating stories about our homes in a way that does not apologize for their language, their poetry, their magic, but at the same time welcomes and invites the Canadian artist and audience to find themselves in relation to our offering. I think everybody that watches today's webinar is going to be thrilled with what they hear. I know that it's been really a delight to talk to all of you. So I'm going to start off with Tufik. When I have a bad day at work, I sometimes come home and eat more than I like, and I indulge maybe in ice cream or something else. In 2002, when you had a bad day at work, you did something very different. Can you share with everybody your subway ride home?
Oh, Lord. Yeah, well, there was a pretty great introduction. I didn't expect that. Well, yeah, the story of me being in Canada today is in October 2002. I had a pretty rough, exhausting day. My colleagues were kind of exhausting and boring, and so I was like tired of my job. I was like, you know what, I'm done with Paris. I'm gonna leave. I don't know where I'm out. Juices. So by the time I decided that I'm going to go. I was in the subway in Paris and I sat, and then in front of me, there was this big sign of like, come live in Quebec. It's like a marketing ad that campaign that Quebec did in fall 2002. So yeah, I got home, filled out some documents, and then next thing I know, I got enrolled into getting my certificate to get to Canada. So I got there 10 months after, and that's it. And the rest is history. So yeah, I just followed my guts, and I guess my guts took me way further than I expected. But hey, life is beautiful like that. So.
Now, and I know that a lot of your art is about trusting your art, and we're going to share, but learn a lot more about that shortly. Igor, very few people I know come to Canada and have a story about embezzlement, a war taking place in not their home country, and being kicked out of their hotel. Can you perhaps share with the audience today how your immigration to Canada took place?
Well, in 1990, there was an American producer came to Russia with a great idea to create a joint venture show, and he called it Russians on Broadway. So there was a 54 very high-class artists. We have a lot of dancers, and actually we didn't go to US, we went to Canada. And we went in 1992 with the Yugoslavian airline jet. At the time, as soon as and we were flying through Belgrade, it was last day of peace in Belgrade. We flew to Canada and war started. When we came to Canada, we performed in music hall on Dunford in Toronto, and it was quite successful. We got great reviews. And after a couple of weeks of performance, we were trying to get into myself into my room in a hotel, but I wasn't allowed to get in, and asked why, and they told me our producer didn't pay money for the hotel. So we're kicked out of hotel. I went back to the theater, and show that's supposed to go on was canceled because our producer didn't pay union for continuing the show. So finally, we ended up basically on the street, 54 people. And fortunately, I'm always thankful to Canadians. They come to rescue. They were offering food, place to stay, and so on and on and on. And it was so funny because during the day I was a Russian star performing in Canada. During the night I was walking the street and have no place to stay. But I ended up with the Canadian family for almost 6 months. Yeah, but the thing is, before I ended up for 6 months, I knew them for just a few days. And they telling me, we're going to on business trip to Europe, so you can stay at our house. And I told them, you don't know me at all. Don't you afraid that I'm gonna, take all your stuff and run? They say you can do it because we have good insurance policy in Canada. So, and since then, 54 people, 54 were struggling here, and we got a very good lawyer who take our case. And since then, I'm in Canada, 28 years, and 40 of us still in Canada. 14 went back, and they got tickets from Canadians. Canadians gathered money and bought our tickets. Why we couldn't fly back? Because war started in this company that we're flying in. She was closed in Canada. So that's short story of our long, long life in Canada. Something like that.
And I love the fact, Igor, that you shared with me that you have reunions with the same 40 people, that you get back together in March every year. And I thought that was so wonderful that your people that you came to Canada with still are those close friends. And we'll talk a bit more about that afterwards. Ximena, you came on a very different story with your family, and then you found your own kind of immigration journey. Perhaps you can share with the group some of what you shared with me yesterday.
Yeah, so I came from Venezuela almost 11 years ago, and back home I grew up in Caracas in lower middle upper class family, deep in the opposition of the Chavez government. And yeah, my family decided to immigrate when my mom got pregnant with my brother when I was around 14. The crisis was it was a different country. It was a different crisis. It was a different set of problems. There was a lot of violence, like gun violence and kidnapping that was going on prior to the like government and oil crisis. And so my family applied from Venezuela on like one of those call outs. Canada had like a young immigrant families, please come to Canada call outs. And so my dad did that for us from Venezuela. It took 4 years. A bunch of money, a bunch of like application things, just like we had to like gather in order to come to Canada, but we landed as permanent residents already, which is like a very privileged kind of like way of coming into the country. Like I went to theater school, but I paid as a resident. So I didn't have to pay like an international fee, which is like 4 times the amount of money that a resident pays. And so, yeah, we kind of like jumped the gun on the like mass immigration that the Venezuelan crisis has led up to. So it's a very kind of different perspective to it. And then I went to London, Ontario for school. And then eventually I came to Canada. And now I'm a pretty nomadic person. So after like 6 or 7 years of being in Canada and performing and working in the theater, I went back to South America. And I spent, I think, about 9 months between 2018 and 2019 traveling and training in South America and in Europe, just really trying to reconnect with that identity and that memory, both my like Venezuelan and Latinx ancestry and my relationship to the Andean indigenous people specifically, and to the peoples in Colombia and in Venezuela, and then also to the Basque people in Spain, which is where my family like heritage in Venezuela comes from. So then I have this whole kind of link to Europe as well. Yeah.
Ximena, what really moved me yesterday, because until you said the word Caracas, you don't have that accent, and we talked about that yesterday. Can you share with the audience the immigration part of your journey and how it affected your artistic creativity when you wore that label in Fanshawe College in London, and when you moved to Toronto, and how that immigrant of you was able to, how you explore that immigrant component?
Totally, yeah. So I have always been great with languages. It's like I couldn't learn anything else in school, but English, I was like, yep, I just like came wired with it somehow. And I'm a big mimicker of sounds. So it's actually really embarrassing in Spanish if I talk with someone that's from Argentina. In like 10 minutes, I'm gonna sound Argentinian. And so I am a bit of a chameleon in that way. And as a performer, also someone that's like, has a very specific type of like whiteness, white presenting whiteness. Like I'm a white Latinx person. I was able to assimilate very well. So when I came to Fanshawe College in London, Ontario, which is a very middle class white Anglo town in Canada, I just was like, well, I can like totally don this on. And in my program, it was maybe 1 or 2 teachers in 2 years that were like, hey, maybe you should try this monologue in Spanish. And I went into school like the year that I came to Canada. So my experience of migrating, like very much of just like donning the like how can I be as Canadian as I can, in a way that was very expensive and a lot of identity things that I now hold very precious. Like I severed a lot of connection to parts of my artistry and voices and my creativity in that period. Also, I severed my queerness. I just like have this like very backwards, like I came to Canada and was like, but I like men, so I'm just gonna be this like heteronormative, white sounding, white looking person because that's how I'm gonna succeed here. And then it wasn't until I came to Toronto and started working with Aluna Theater in an interpretation lab, which was like the most generous, like, oh my God, job of my dreams. Project where we would come into the studio and investigate translation on our feet. So they would give us a script in Spanish and be like, read it, but in English while you act the scene. That I was kind of faced in front of this mirror of my Venezuelanness, of my Latinxness. And then I also was able to be introduced to a lot of femme and like queer folk in the Latinx community, where I was like, oh, right, this thing that I don't think about, that I just like packed away 6 or 7 years ago, came back up. And so I think Toronto is such a gift, and some of the companies in Toronto are very important to my artistry and to like the diasporic artistry because of that. Sometimes you really need someone else to be like, hey, this is a thing that a lot of people are. You can probably hear someone moving the garbage outside my window. It's just very warm. Maybe they'll be done soon. Yeah.
That's wonderful. So, and I appreciate you sharing that. So, Tufik, when we spoke, it was really interesting because your move to Canada allowed you to wear different costumes, and that you probably wouldn't have worn in Morocco or in France. So, can you perhaps talk about how when you came to Canada, it allowed you in your artistry to do things because you were in Quebec?
Well, the thing is that when I was in France, I was already doing kind of drag. I was doing some drag and some performances and spaces, like mostly clubs and parties. But I never saw it as an artistic way to express myself. I always thought it was creative. I was like loud or flamboyant, but I never thought myself as an artist. It's when I arrived in Quebec in 2003 and therefore in Canada that I found myself in a position where, like Ximena just said earlier, you said that you arrived in Canada and then you took on like the fact that you are white passing. You're just like, okay, so I'm going to be this and I'm going to melt in and just like follow how it works inside in the look where you are. And in my case, I've always been used to never fitting, because of course with the face that I got being born in France, I was not French because I was not white. Then when I was in Morocco, I was the French, so I was not really Moroccan. And then I arrived here and then I'm like the Arab guy that speaks like a white guy. But then is the funny thing is that at the same time I see Canada being diverse, and then I see Quebec being also diverse, but with the language point that is super important. And because of this questioning about the language, about the identity, I just realized that, oh, I can be in a community, in a society that is made out of white people, cis people, normative people, that still consider themselves being a minority, being scared for their culture and their language. For me, it was like mind-boggling. I was like, is there a camera hidden somewhere that's a joke? I thought I was the only one. So it really started like this. And this whole idea of being yourself and what do you bring to the society. And it also brought for me the whole concept of the prejudging attitude that we have, whether we want it or not, about how we look versus who we are as people. Like we're now 4 people in this screen. One of us is non-binary. 3 of us is allegedly cis, and you know what I mean. But the thing is that our image will totally define different things. My sexuality is totally invisible with the look that I got, but still, I'm a homosexual man. But then again, I could define myself as a non-binary person. It wouldn't show because my expression of gender is not my definition of gender. And this is the type of thing that I find interesting, is coming from the background that I come from with Muslim family, with the Moroccan culture and the French culture. I don't think I've seen anyone that looks like me and that does what I do. And I think it's important to break those images and to be a cis homosexual man coming from a Muslim Arabic culture and be totally flamboyant, totally queer, totally out there, and be comfortable with that. I think it sends a message of openness, of diversity. But one of the things that for me is important also in my work is to show that there must be respect and an openness into discussing. I think for me, art is to create bridges, to make people discuss and exchange about things that they wouldn't talk about normally. And if I can be a sort of a little detonator, no pun intended, a detonator of a discussion, you know what I mean, about something that can last, let's do that. So it's really what Quebec and Canada brought as identities that for me was super inspiring. And so this is what I'm doing, the art that I'm doing, which is interpreting different characters using my body as it is, meaning that I don't add any padding, I don't put like anything on my face, everything apart from the beard, there's like a bunch of wigs and dresses and heels, of course, and I should hide it, but there's like a bunch of dresses here, but you're not supposed to know about it. But that's what I'm doing, is it's really like an art about the image and the comfort of being yourself in the end of the day.
And I loved how in your work and in our discussion, we talked about that what Canada did for you is in some way let you use your art to show that we all, no matter who we are, where we come from, what our sexuality is, what our interests are, what our biases are, we all have the same fears. We all want to belong. We all have the same concerns about how we look at things. And we're going to explore that a little later with you, but I do want to get to Igor because his artwork, his way of being an artist is very different. It's much really dependent on being very often in front of an audience. But a lot of what you did, Igor, what I was impressed with is that there were two things that really stuck out for me. One is that when you got your first gig, you moved from Toronto to Montreal. You know, and I want to share what it's like being a newcomer in a new country and then leaving that familiar to try and make a living. And I think many of our newcomers have to go through that. And then I have a second question I want to fit in with that with you.
Well, you know, the thing is with us, first of all, language, and we're talking about it. Obviously, I do have an accent. It's a strong accent. And I was told in Canada, I find it out that you can get rid of accent if you come before puberty. After puberty, it's almost impossible. Unfortunately, I came when I was already grown up man. So my accent with me, I'm kind of losing it when I'm singing. But the thing is, with music is international language. And for us, it was kind of easy. We were performing, and as a singer, I was invited to join a show in Montreal. And I went there, and I just did whatever I did always. The only problem with me was that I couldn't speak English at all at the time. And I went to normal school. I went to basically to high school. What I love about Canada, again, I don't know how it's now in Canada because it was a while ago. But I went to school for 2 years. I was studying language. I supposed to get 8 credits, pass my exam, and then, you know, go on with my life. And I was, at evening, I was performing in a big show, La Kafkan, theater La Kafkan, very posh style. And during the day, I was a student like everybody else, and I was trying to, you know, to learn the language. And again, in my case, it was much easier. With some other actors who wasn't able to sing because we have people who was just dramatic actors, they changed profession. One of them now, you know, working in a car industry, the other one doing something else. So, you know, it's a kind of tough gig, especially when you don't speak the language. But I'm a stubborn guy. So immediately, as soon as I got to Canada, I went for castings. And I had a friend of mine here in Toronto who, of course, had very good English, and I would go to showcases together. And I would walk into the room and they would ask, "Oh, are you a duo?" And he would say, "No, I'm a translator. This guy want to get the job." So, so you know, that was my gig. Finally, there was a lady in one of the auditions who gave me her business card, and she said, "As soon as you will understand me on your own, give me a call." And she changed my life totally. I called her. She was representative of one of the biggest American artistic agency, and from year 2000, I called her in '99, and I said, "Do you remember me, this Russian guy Igor?" She said, "Oh, cool! Now you can speak the language." And since then, I was traveling heavily, and I visited 86 plus countries with my solo concerts. So, you know, that's the life, and everything happening on purpose. Yeah.
And I love the fact that you share the challenge and difficulty that language means and how so many immigrants land up having to give up what they thought was going to be their life dream in terms of their work to make it. And I know when my dad came to Montreal in the 1950s, he had to pay a private tutor to learn English because he had to work during the day. He didn't have that luxury of that day and night thing. And he tells me the story that if he didn't learn English, he couldn't support his family. Like that was really the essence. So it's very hard. It's really a hard challenge that immigrants face. But I also appreciate the fact of your tenacity. And I think that tenacity is an attribute that we see in a lot of immigrants because that's the way that they make their dreams happen. You know, Ximena shared their story in terms of, you know, going back to South America, revisiting their roots. A lot of the work you do, Igor, is going back to the former Soviet Union. And you're doing work there, taking a lot of anglicized work into that culture. What is it like being a Russian immigrant to Canada as a Canadian, actually, and has citizenship, a green card in the States as well. And then going back to Russia and going back in that kind of form. How do you find your artistic, your artistic work is
well, the funny part is in Russia, we're saying there is no profit in your own state. So when you live in Russia and you're going to other country, you got a Canadian passport, and suddenly you're like a different person on a much higher level. For some reason, Canada, it's some tail country that people live such a prosperous life, and it's such a great country. And suddenly this guy who was living with us came to Canada, and after a number of years come back, he's so close to God now. So basically, it's true. It helped me so much. But the thing is, like I'm heavily in musicals again. I did a lot of major musicals. And when I came back I was invited by actually Disneyland back to Russia to participate in Beauty and the Beast. And when I came to country, first of all, I kind of brought Canadian, North American culture to Russia. I kind of taught a lot of youngsters what musical is, because in Russia, the most popular would be Cats, Phantom of the Opera, and few more. Jesus Christ Superstar. That's it. They didn't know anything about musicals, basically. And when I came, I was kind of educator. I was gathering youngsters and telling them there is such more to musicals. And I brought my experience because I came back to Russia in 2008. So I had a big North American experience and I was sharing it. So, for me, it was a lot of fun, and I hope for them too.
That's wonderful. So the topic actually today is, I want to share about your story, but really, how are you as artists coping with COVID, and the new reality we're living in? And we know that Shakespeare wrote some of his best works during the plague, and so we're wondering, does this fuel your creativity? Does it hinder your creativity? So Ximena, we had a really interesting conversation about that. Can you perhaps share some of your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to just kind of loop back to a couple of things that Igor and Tufik had mentioned. I just think it's really interesting to think about like auditory diversity. We're in such a place of like, make space for like the body, like the foreign body, the other body, the body of color, and you see a lot of like representation visually inside of that work that we're doing as immigrants, and like in terms of diversity and inclusivity. But I just think that we're very behind in what auditory diversity is. Like those bodies still need to speak a specific level, unaccented like version of English in order to like attain visibility. And so I think that that's really interesting and kind of loops into the work that I'm doing and the way that I am navigating or benefiting from the obstacles that the crisis that we're in are putting in front of us. My work is really interested in how to shift responsibility and accountability and presence and intention to the audience as like they receive performative experiences. I think that we're used to sitting back and listening in the accent that it's easy for me to hear in, and like for things to like happen in a way where like my attention, if I start to drift, something quick is going to happen in the script that's going to grab my attention again, or like there's going to be a new change in the image that's going to that's going to do the work for me to not fall out of attention. And I'm curious about how we can interact with audiences and create work that flex the attention muscles that we have and that like shift that responsibility. I think about this a lot when I think about accents and other languages. I think that we put all the responsibility in the person that is speaking English and not on the person that is listening. And I think that there's something really beautiful about listening to someone speak with quote unquote broken English, because what is happening more often than not is that you're hearing them speak their actual language in the shape of English or through the words of English. But when you hear a grammatically incorrect sentence from someone that speaks Italian, you're hearing a sentence in the way that Italian grammar builds it, but in English. And I think that as someone that receives that, as an audience member to that, I can do more work. I can like lean forward and receive that in a way that is exciting to me. I think that like that disencounter can generate like a more present, more genuine, more vulnerable way of being. And I think that what is happening right now is that we're all in our own bubbles. Like all that I have is like my own responsibility to my time, how much energy I put out and how much energy I receive. If I don't remember to write down this panel, I'm not gonna go out into the world and like it's not gonna be fed to me. And so I I had a lot of things that like just fell through. I was gonna do my drag debut, like drag burlesque performance, the month that everything shut down. And I did it virtually and it was exciting and heartbreaking. And I was like, oh no, I can't. And I was mentioning this when I was speaking with Elise, like I cheer on the performers that are figuring it out, that are like doing the virtual work, that are trying to like maintain and explore how to translate the energetic exchange that happens in performance through a virtual lens. I think they're heroes, and that's just not me. Like I'm like in the like batch of people that is like, I need to sit and like look at what slowness means, what stillness means, and how can I infuse the things that I'm learning about myself into the way that I create performative work for others whenever we come back out. Because when I did that burlesque drag performance, I was depleted of all my like vulnerability and energy. And at the end, I was heartbroken. I was like, oh, I'm alone in my house and no one is seeing me and no one, like, I'm not getting even like the applause. And already our performer to audience contract is very tilted. Like the performer gives most of it. And so this just like separation that further places it away is very jarring to me. And I really hope that we're taking care of those performers, or that those performers are doing their own work to take care of that and to like navigate that so that they don't come out of this crisis entirely depleted, because we need the artists when we come back out.
100%. So I want to make sure that an earlier point you made does not get lost with the really interesting stuff you just said. But I love when you talked about how to welcome and embrace that broken English, because I think in those gaps, we actually connect to another culture. We connect to the person. And when it's all perfect and it's what you expect to hear, you don't get to hear the unexpected. And that's where the wonder takes place. So I love that you raised that. And if there's time later on, it would be really interesting, I think, for the audience to hear about how you normally in non-COVID times engage the audience by inviting them to a performance that feels like a dress rehearsal. And so I'm trying to keep you all tuned in for the remainder of this webinar. Tawfiq, we had an interesting discussion. I apologize, my phone went off. Tawfiq, we had a really interesting discussion about the creativity that you're having.
Yep.
And this new project that you're doing, about the dream you had and how you woke up and you started to write all these personas. And you're not, like, forget Shakespeare. I'm excited about what Tawfiq is going to come up with during the COVID crisis. You could share with people the project you shared with me.
Yeah, of course, I'll be happy to. But I would love to jump again on the point that Ximena just said before, because I think it's super important. When you talk about language, you also talk about accent, obviously, but you also talk about the access to the language. My situation was with my parents. My father in particular doesn't know how to write or read French. Although he lives in France, he's never been to school to learn French, how to write it. Although he speaks it with a broken French, pretty good broken French, but he doesn't know how to read. So when I talked about to my parents about the work that I was doing, about the characters and their biographies and everything, my dad looks at me and goes like, why don't you just write a book? And it's just like, no, I won't write a book, because if I write a book, you won't be able to read it. Images speak to everyone. And this is exactly the type of thing that I find it's important, is also to realize that art should be accessible to everyone. Yeah. So when we talk about the diversity of the auditory of the people that can access the work and see it, I also take this at heart. I think it's important for the art to be accessible to everyone. And funnily enough, the situation now where everybody is stuck at home in a better or worse situation, because this is something that we really should keep in mind. The last I think I consider being in confinement for 74 days. I used this period of time to actually put online work in a kind of volunteering manner. Like I was not getting any money from it, but I think that the worst times in politics and economics are the time where art is the most interesting or most relevant. I'm not saying that it's not when everything is okay, but when we struggle, when we hustle, this is where things happen. And when we talk about also, I had also a bunch of gigs. I had like 2 residencies that just went out of the window. I had to go see my family. Anyway, like everything is canceled for like 6 months. And apart from dealing with this, I'm not going to be complaining because I consider having a first world problem. I'm an artist. I'm in Montreal. I'm happy. I love what I'm doing. So, and I still can eat and pay the rent. So I'm fine. But the interesting part is when you think about how you're going to translate some works that you were supposed to present. Like I was supposed to do a live performance, and it didn't happen anymore. Now they ask me to do it virtually. And I was like, yeah, but how would you translate virtually a work that is supposed to be in front of people? Like Ximena said, and I'm sure Igor would agree with me, when you're on stage, you're given your show, you're given energy. And obviously the public is giving you energy back. Whether they like it or not, that's another topic. But at least you get something back. Now we're 4 people in front of a screen. I can be dancing, I can be doing anything. All I get back is a screen. And it doesn't change whether you like it or not. But the whole primal feelings of humans that we have, which is emotions and energy, doesn't exist anymore. So you have to think first about how you translate your work into a virtual space. First, this is one of the first problems. And the second is how would you create knowing that you'll be sending the work and get nothing back? So I'm not surprised that Ximena was totally emptied of any emotion after that. You were like drained, obviously, because you gave it all for a screen, and you had a screen back. So people can, of course, can cheer, can applaud, can do whatever, but it's not the same thing at all. So in my case, I'm working now on my new project, which is about the representation of self on dating apps. So now I have 15 characters that all have a biography, a name, and et cetera, et cetera. But for my next project, I will have 100 characters. And I was already thinking about a digital manner of creating. So I'm quite lucky in a way to have been thinking about this for the past 5 years. The problem is that I still think about the performance part of it. I still think about a visual part of it. But this situation cuts everything. We're just going into digital. And all art is not made for digital. All art is not made to be on the computer screen. So I do visual and performance art. So I can present the visual on the computer, on Zoom, but performing, I'm not sure. You know what I mean? So it's all these questions. But once again, like I said, I'm personally able to think about this because I'm single. I live in an apartment. I have big windows. Everything is fine. I'm not stuck in a 1-bedroom apartment with 3 people. And you know what I mean? Like my situation allow me to do what I'm doing. But I really need to stress again that this pandemic has really destroyed a lot of life, and us as artists also. I'm part of the one who had the luxury of not having suffered too much about it.
Thank you so much. Igor, would you like to comment on the other panelists, and also how are you handling this? Because I know so much of your work gets that energy from the people, you know, on stage.
Well, you know, we supposed to have a big premiere at the beginning of April in Moscow, then in St. Petersburg, when everything was canceled. And I understand that our business is going to be hit the hardest, and we probably will be recovering the last one because people angry, hungry, and well, not I'm talking now about Russia hungry, not in Canada. So basically, the day when I find out that nothing gonna happen, I went home and I recorded the song. I didn't record it, I just put it live on Facebook and some other places, and people start to write to me. Listen, please, if possible, do it as often as you can. In Russia, in order to get out on the street, you have to have special digital permission. So in Russian, I called it imprisonment. So I started cycle of songs from imprisonment. And basically every single day I would record 2 songs, one in the morning, one in the evening. And I would put it out, and a lot of people would write to me, and then started this little thing that people would say, listen, my mom, she's in the hospital now, and she heard this song. Can you do another one, please, for her? And I would mention the name. Then next person would say, listen, my father, my brother has birthday. Can you sing, please, for him or for her? And I would do it. Then I started experimenting with different styles, and like I would put, like, for example, I sing "You Simply the Best," famous song, which song sang by Tina Turner, and people would say, oh cool, listen, that's an interesting version, can you sing some other female songs? And I would sing female songs. Then I did jazz, then I did rock, then I did opera. And recently we have this kind of art in Russia. Well, I call it prison art. I mean, it's songs about imprisonment and so and so, and it's a tough people who spent in jail for 30 years. So I shaved my head, and I thought, oh, now I look like prisoner, you know. So I had a little beard a couple of days ago, and I recorded the song. And suddenly, agents in Moscow, TV agents, wrote to me, listen, man, we haven't seen you in this image. You're always kind of intelligent Jewish guy, but suddenly, man, it's such a good possibilities. But the thing is, again, and I agree with all panelists, we addicts in this good way, addicts for audience. We need people to see us. We need this. Of course, I can read on the screen people writing to me, thank you so much for this, thank you so much for that. But we kind of manipulators in a good way again. And suddenly there is no audience, and I love to walk out on stage, start to sing. In 5 minutes, I know those people. I know what to sing next, what to say. So they would love me or hate me, whatever feelings. But now I don't feel it. It's just as I agree totally with you guys that it's a scream, and you can scream at it, and you know there is no basically feedback. But at least I keep myself busy.
So first of all, I feel very bad for all our participants because I got to spend much more time with each of you and it wasn't enough time. And I'm looking at the clock. We have 13 minutes left. I do have to mention that JIAS does teach English as a second language. And it's one of the things I'm the most proud about. I love going to our schools and seeing our students. And I think that's one of the best things that we do in settlement is give people that tool so that in their own accents, they can be effective and be able to have the conversations that otherwise they would be left out of, whether it's to listen or to have a voice, and that's so important. So I'd like to give all of you an opportunity to make some comments about what other people said, what I didn't ask, things that you think are just important to share. So Ximena, do you want to start us off?
Sure, yeah, it's so, I mean, there's so much. I think that it's really interesting and just really great to get to like hear such like diverse and like similar like paths in terms of like, yeah, like I think that the immigrant experience like puts a lens on things that kind of like tethers us. The show that you mentioned in my bio, Nuestra Señora de las Nubes, is like about this like fake country that is like all countries. So people like, it's this notion of, oh, I'm from, like for me, I came from Venezuela 11 years ago. Like I didn't come from the same Venezuela that someone that came from Venezuela 3 years ago did. Like that country that I left like is no longer. And so I think just to meet and to hear their, like my co-panelist perspective is just like so generous. I'm really interested in how, what Tufik was talking about in terms of like the image being like a place that makes things accessible, and also music. Like I think that those are places in which we can communicate. Like I think language in all of its forms. I think images can be a language. It seems to be like a really interesting place. And it's interesting to be met with this obstacle where like we have the virtual image, and like what we're finding is the like how flat it is, how it lacks in like depth. So I was curious to think about like this thing that you were mentioning of how inside of French in Quebec, the like white cis men all of a sudden also has this like gap in their wellness or in their like identity through language. I think that that's a really interesting like flip to coming to Canada. I mean, I've never lived in Quebec, so I'm just really curious about that experience.
Well, I was just personally surprised to arrive as a visible minority in Quebec, where the majority is francophone and white. So I thought that because they're francophone and white, why would you have any identity question? You know what I mean? But what I said years ago, and I use it still, is that I feel like Quebec is like this person who's going through puberty. You know what I mean? So the body's changing. I'm like, oh, what's happening? What's happening? You know what I mean? Like, how am I going to handle immigrant that are coming and defending the French, and then how can I defend the French while being in Canada, and how do I handle the politics of it, the economics of it, the culture of it? And that for me was like a light bulb. Was like, oh, there's something interesting here. So when I started looking and reading and educate myself, literally, it's just fascinating. So this is where it started. And I really thought in myself, and I'm really not talking about the system. I'm talking about the individual experience. For me, this is the thing that is super important. For me, the concept of the individual experience being the same for everyone. Everyone has doubts about who they are. Everyone question their parents. Everyone question themselves. Will they make it? Are they good enough? Do they deserve love, respect, etc., etc.? And I think for me, this is the thing that I go to this really intimate, universal feeling, because each and every one of us had it, whether we were born here, there, and you know what, it's something that is universal per se, that actually bond us together. And this is really what I try to make with my art.
It's so special that you say that, because on my first email from Tufik, he ends it off saying, "Love Tufik." And I'm thinking, I don't know this guy. And then I realized he's saying to me, I'm welcoming you, I'm accepting you for who you are. I have no clue who you are, but you know what? That door is open. And that is so much who you are in terms of your art. And you really, in your innovative expression, you make us all feel the same. And that's really a gift. And I think, and that's so lovely that now we're ending with Igor, because I think what you do and what you shared about how you bring, whether it's rock or jazz or opera, you're using music of a way of connecting people, not only in Canada, but in Russia, people who do not have access to what we have access and take for granted here, and you're opening up that possibility. So what are the comments that you would like to share?
You know what, I want to say that when I came to Canada, some of my friends complaining, and I want to tell guys, we are the luckiest people on earth that we have this country. If I would have more time, I would tell you what the situation in Russia like. And I always telling people, listen guys, you want to appreciate what you have, go for 1 month, just 1 month to Russia, or probably Venezuela too. I wouldn't talk about France, but
you can say French too. It works. French too.
yeah. And spend just 1 month, not like a tourist, but like a citizen of the country. And when you come back, you would say, thank you, Canada, that you exist. And that's my point. But listen, guys, we are fortunate that we are here. We are safe. We at home, yeah, we're struggling, but I wish all my Russian friends to, at some point, reach this level of prosperity that Canada has. You know, so That's what I'm gonna say. That's it.
And I love that you share that. I remember I had to make a presentation to a government committee. And before I went in, I took my cell phone, walked out of the room, and I called my father and I said, and my dad's a Holocaust survivor who came from Poland to Germany, Germany to France, France to Canada. And I said, thank you for choosing Canada, because there's very few countries that would give me this opportunity to do what I'm getting to do in 5 minutes. And then I hung up. But it's, you know, that gratitude that we have in Canada. And so we have a couple of minutes left. And so why don't we all end with a bit of a thank you to Canada and just something about what Canada lets you do with your work. So Ximena, you're up.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say thank you, Elise, to you and to JIAS and to the Koffler Gallery and to Jessica and to Naomi and to Jody for hosting us, Tufik and Igor. It's been so amazing to speak with both of you. I think what Canada, I'm so grateful to have come to Canada, and I think that we're positioned so well, which to me what that does is it highlights the responsibility that I have. Like when I think about myself as someone that is well inside of everything that is going on, it like allows me inside of my comfort to think about this bridge and to think about how I can be a little thread inside of this building of a bridge for important conversations, because I think it is important to have these conversations outside of the reach of Canada. I think that having a lot means that you can share a lot. I believe a lot in abundance. And so I think that being here allows for me to think about work in through an abundant lens. And I'm really grateful for that.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. Tufik?
Yes. Well, thank you everyone for this panel. It was great. It's pretty awesome to be discussing this subject that I find quite sensitive, and it's not always easy to talk about immigration and being part of communities. But like I heard, it's important to keep in mind that yes, we're in Canada and we're lucky to be here, but there's still a lot of work to be done. A lot of work to be done for people of color here. A lot of work to be done with the indigenous people, the rights that we have to give them, the respect of the different communities. And I think it's really would be, we're better off compared to other people, but we still have together to lift each other up and lift each other up in a very equal, open, and sincere manner. And I think sometimes recognizing our mistake is a way to also move on. You know what I mean? And grow together. So I just hope that the discussion that we're having here is just really gonna put everyone into a thinking mode and being just open into seeking constructive criticism and growing and evolving in the right direction. So thank you so much for JIAS and Koffler to make this happen.
Beautiful, thank you. And last but not least, Igor?
Yeah, I already tell you what I think about Canada, and I want to thank all you guys. You were so great. Thank you for inviting me, and it was such a great time I spent. And there was a time in my life when, and I remember it, and I will remember it for the rest of my life. And you know, just last word. What a wonderful world! Great song.
So nice. So first of all, I want to thank all of you. Huge shout out to the Koffler group and to Jessica in particular for your help. Jody, this would not happen without you from my team. I really thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I just have to thank Canada, and I have to thank my board of directors for hiring me, because this is the best gig in the whole country, getting to help newcomers. Every day I wake up and I go, I get to help somebody who's starting a new life here, and it doesn't get better than this. And so with that, I want to wish everybody good health, safety. May all your loved ones be well. And during this time of difficulty and challenges, I hope that you have broken conversations that bring new light and new friendships. I hope that your preconceptions and biases and things that you always believed in have an opportunity to be changed and opened with art and the light that it was brought to it. And I hope that everybody has some music in their life to bring them joy and bring them to a place of comfort. So thank you all. Stay healthy and safe. And once again, thank you to the panelists. You've been amazing. And I look forward to meeting you in person and giving you a real hug. And love you all, according to Tufik.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.